How many of you guys think you're pretty good observers?
Not good enough.
I mean, really, when you think about it, they say,
observe the damage.
yeah, usually we live in the moment kind of thing of what's going on today, and we just focus on that. And I think it's real important when you go out in that field, and we didn't do a lot of it yesterday. We'll do some more, we'll do it today, but going out and really, well, we talked in the crop side, we talked a lot about observing your crop and everything, but we also need to be focused on what's going on in our soils and realize that our farm is actually a bigger part of the entire ecosystem that surrounds the farm as well. So how does our management affect what's going on around us? So anything else? Anyone? This is a shy group.
I think it's interesting, just kind of the charts and curves, getting a little deeper into when and where and how that plant needs the nutrition.
Yeah.
Instead of throw it all out there to be there when it needs it.
Yeah.
Throw it out there in the middle of September after bean harvest and let it ride.
Yeah.
Right? You think it'll be there come next year, and maybe it will be, maybe it won't be, you know? And how much of it, you know, nutrition-wise, or plant nutrition is just living off of legacy, what's in that soil. You know, Russell talked about and showed that total nutrient digestion chart yesterday. You remember that? So that's this big pool of nutrients, right? And then you got this smaller pool. We think of that. The next one is maybe the exchangeable fraction, extractable, right? So that's what we'd see on the standard soil test, but that doesn't really correlate to what the plant can take up. In Illinois, if you take a soil sample to a lab, they'll report that back as pounds per acre. So farmers think, well, I've got 200 pounds per acre of potassium, or 60 pounds per acre, or 70 pounds per acre of phosphorus, right? But that's not really what the plant is seeing. So those tests, are they recorded here in parts per million? And that's the way it should be, you know, because it's not really the true pounds per acre. So it should, and granted, you can take, there's 2 million pounds of topsoil on top 6 inches. So when you take parts per million times 2, you can get quote unquote pounds per acre. So that's where that logic comes in to play, but that's not really factual, right? So with the Haney test, like we were talking about, that's kind of a smaller pool that this is what the plants can actually see today. Like Russell was saying, the acids that are being used, the oxalic, the malic, the citric acid, those have a pH of basically orange juice, right? So it's pretty mild pH, highly buffered pH. So you hit that soil with that acid and it quickly goes back to its regular pH. Whereas if you're using ammonium acetate and some of these others, you drop that pH range down to even a 1. Okay, do our soils see a pH of 1 naturally? I mean, those plants will buffer that pH in that root rhizosphere area, maybe 1, maybe 2 points, depending. So they can actually make that area around the root a little bit more acidic or a little bit more alkaline to make whatever nutrients they want available as well. And that works with the microbes in that soil. So that's kind of an interesting concept when you really start thinking about it. The plants aren't really that dumb, you know? What's our biggest weed that we fight here? Thistle? Water hemp. So in my area, water hemp's pretty bad, right? Starting to see a little bit of palmer and everything. And we think we can outcompete that with herbicide, but it's proven us wrong every year. You know, that weed is actually pretty smart. It's kind of like rootworm. You guys have rootworm issues around? Maybe not so much here, but we think rootworm's a pretty dumb little insect, but it's actually pretty smart. That insect has figured out, well, I'll just go lay eggs in a bean field because the next year it'll be corn. And some of them actually don't hatch for 2 years. So we got Smart Stacks Genetics that came out, what, 2010, 12 era. And now we've got resistance to that. And now we've got mRNA technology out there that's supposed to be help control root worms. But that technology kind of scares me a little bit, to be honest. And talking with some other entomologists, Jonathan Lundgren and some others, that root worm will be able to alter, it'll be able to alter itself basically quicker to that protein or the mRNA technology quicker than what it did to smart stacks.
Still another Band-Aid.
Just another Band-Aid on a gushing wound. Cut your finger off and put a Band-Aid on it and go to work.
Well, the other thing a lot of people don't know with that is it has to eat it, so you actually will get more root feeding on the new gene before the rootworm dies.
There you go.
You paid more for it.
Yeah. Your cost seed isn't going down any, is it? It's done nothing but go up. Yes,
To
sir.
make a point, you asked what's the main weed. I think what comes up is which weed didn't get killed by a chemical. The question maybe should be which are the first predominant weeds that show up in your field before you sprayed. That the weeds are indicators of your soil condition.
Absolutely.
But if the chemical wipes it out, then you can ignore it. But that's actually still, the first weeds should be probably the ones you are concerned with, not just the chemical failure.
Yeah.
Is that a good?
Yeah, so I a lot of times I look at a weed and say, okay, what's that weed telling me about the soil itself? And there's some good books out there. Weeds, Guardians of the Soil, Weed Control Without Poison, Weeds and What They Tell Us. There's several of these books out here. I really highly recommend every farmer have on their bookshelf, because if you've got a problem weed out there, you can look it up and say, what's this plant telling me about my soil?
What's Mother Nature trying to fix?
Exactly, right? And it might be that some is a high calcium, some is a low calcium, some's a high magnesium, some's a, we've had potash, or spread a lot of potash, and that actually binds our soils tight. How many of you guys know that potash actually binds soil particles together tight? So if you look at some data, when they bore wells for gas or whatever, oil, they'll actually inject on certain clays high rates of potassium, liquid potassium chloride into that well casing, because it keeps it cemented together and not allow it to fall in. So when we're spreading 200, 300, 400 pounds of K out there for a buildup, what are we doing to our soils? Tightening it. And you could go out and spread 200 pounds, go out a month later and take a sample and actually see those levels drop. Because the way that the soil releases that K, when it gets wet, that clay shrinks and swells, right? When it wets and dries again, that shrinking and swelling is what releases the potassium in that soil. So you guys were dry the last 3 years. How many of y'all pulled soil samples the last 3 years in the fall? In Illinois, they've been doing it. They did it last year, they did it the year before that. I refused to take soil samples in the fall because it was going to give you a false reading. Every farmer that I knew was saying, I can't believe how much lime I have to spread and what my K levels are and how much K I'm having to spread. I'm like, you're taking a soil sample every 4 years and you just took it on a bad year that's going to tell you that you need more. That's the more on approach of farming, in my opinion. So, what good is that data? You paid for it and it's junk. What else? Anybody from this side of the room? No? What about on the grazing side? Any ahas? What'd you tell them yesterday, Hugh?
First, what we wanted to do is just get an assessment of what was there. Try to get an idea of what the forage production is, get an idea about what we wanted to graze, what did we want to leave, and how much we wanted to leave, and for the organism. So trying to give an idea that we're not just feeding cattle, but we're also feeding the land, the organisms within it. And then we went through and tried to determine how large of an area that we were going to need for the animals that we had out there. And made an estimate. Now we go back out there today to figure out whether that was something that was close or did we have to make some adjustments. And then what we'll do today is go out and talk a little bit more about another method that kind of shores up your pounds per acre inch of height by measuring disappearance based off of a known height on a pre-grazed area.
There you go. So a lot of observations. When you're grazing, you got to look not only at what's ahead of you, but what's behind you as well, and what's being grazed on that day. Don, Grant, are you guys moving every day?
Some groups we are, some groups we're not.
Okay. So there's probably a reason why too, right?
Yep.
Different classes of cattle need different types of energy and protein needs. Especially young heifers, if you're planning on trying to breed those heifers and you're not meeting their daily requirements, where's your conception rates go? In the tank. Guess what happens to your profitability? In the tank, right? So that's something to really think about too. Man, I just had something on the tip of my tongue I was going to say about grazing. I can't think of it now.
We've talked a lot about quantity of grazing and more stocking rates and stuff. We haven't really talked about the quality of the forage. Is there any discussion about that?
Is that coming today, talking about the quality of forage?
The relative feed value of that?
Feed value, we talked a little bit about bricks, but we'll talk a little bit more about feed quality.
There you go. Yep.
That's a missing.
Yep. So if you're out there grazing that really mature forage, it's all seeded out, and you're trying to put pounds on an animal, good luck. It's going to take a long time, right? Especially young animals. You need more protein at that time. In my area, I've got a lot of fescue. I used to run stocker calves from April till September. My average daily gain be about 1.25. I changed and went from April to July. My ADG went up to 2.5, 2.7. Because I was grazing exactly what that animal needed. I was starving it those other months, basically. So I kept them for a shorter period of time. I made more money. Banker was happy, I was happy. I had greater rest and recovery on that. And if I wanted to, I could have brought in some mature cows in the fall time and grazed that fescue then, because it was a little bit more rank and they could handle that. So it's all about being adaptable, right? And you start thinking about this acre out here and 43,560 square feet. How can you optimize production on that acre? In my area, it's just corn, bean, corn, bean, corn, bean. What if we could put another enterprise in that? And so you've got, if you're a livestock and a crop guy, you've got a lot of different enterprises, especially if you're a cow-calf, right? So if you're raising seed stock or bulls, you got a bull enterprise, you got heifer enterprises, you got calf enterprise, you got a cow enterprise, you got corn enterprise, you got maybe a wheat enterprise or a small grain, and you got soybean enterprise, right? So you got a lot of different enterprises there to work with. Challenge in my area becomes, we've got cash rents that are annual leases, and a couple guys we talked about last night, we've got a lot of annual leases that are anywhere from $250 on the low side up to $600 an acre, and it's on an annual contract. We've spent the last 40 years tearing out fences. It's hard to bring those fences back in the I-states. Until we can get multi-year contracts on that, you just can't do it. And that's even the struggle trying to get cover crops established in those environments as well. Anything else?
Landowner doesn't see the value there.
No.
I mean, and that's where the education needs to I'm saying the cover crops, correct. Their investment.
Yep. Do you know who the number one landowner that sees the value in it is? The old widowed lady.
That's exactly what's happened to us. is these absentee landowners are coming back, they're finding out what soil health is about, what their farm should look like, and we have picked up a tremendous amount of land. I mean, these landowners are figuring this out. We've turned down a tremendous amount of land that's been offered to us because we're one of the few in this community that's doing these practices.
The women will get this before the men because women are just more nurturing and by nature.
I mean, we have folks emailing me all the time looking for, well, you know anybody in this area that'll farm my ground regeneratively? I mean, those are the kind of emails we get.
Yeah, a lot of opportunity for young people out there, really.
Nice people are out here.
If you're connected.
Voluntarily give it to somebody.
So that's swipe left.
It doesn't have a plow in the ground, so you're not getting it.
But that's the part that's completely blowing my mind is this farm we got across the river. I never met that lady. I knew who she was. Had the same tenant for 36 years. 300 plus an acre cash rent. And she said, go home, make me an offer. And we made her an offer for a significant amount less, and she took it. And she offered us a 5-year contract because she knew it was going to take us time to rebuild her soils. And then she was a thinker. She said, you need security in this farming deal. So there's a 7%. We can only move 7% up or down given on corn prices. Just blew us away though.
But at the end of the day, she was armed with the information to understand that she's securing her investment.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
Making that decision.
Yeah.
Right.
And she knew more about me and Dawn than we know about ourselves.
That's scary. She's peeking in at the windows. Hey, Grant, you might need some new underwear, so here's an extra $5. No, actually, I've got a farmer I work with in southern Illinois, and he's got some old widowed landowners who absolutely love it. They know it's and it does something for their soils. They're kind of grasping that, but what they absolutely love is crimson clover. When it's blooming, they just love it. And as long as they have that visual out their back door, that farmer's going nowhere.
Then you get bees on there, and you bring them a couple quarts of honey,
There you go.
and they're never going to quit.
Yep. Team up with somebody that's got some bees, bring some hives in. It's a win-win. If you really want to have fun, if you got a local distillery, get some of the barrels, put the honey in that, get bourbon-infused honey. That's some good stuff. And then they get the barrels back and they make bourbon-infused or honey-infused bourbon. It's good. It's good.
How many barrels did you bring with?
None, but I can point you in the right direction.
Get honey off your own land.
So, anything else?
Love it. We get 9 quarts of honey every fall.
All right, before we break out into a couple groups here again today, I just wanted to hammer on a couple points today because I talked a little bit about pounds per acre per day, but I want to make sure we grasp this. So right now, if the corn is tasseling, okay, and let's say we're going for if on a good year, we're going to make 230 bushel corn, let's say, okay? This is what we're taking up on a per bushel per day. So 0.026 pounds of nitrogen, 0.004 pounds of phosphorus, and 0.08 pounds of potassium. Now, if we're going for 230 bushels and we're tasseling, okay, we're taking up this much actually in that day. So our soil has to be able to supply almost 6 pounds of nitrogen per day. Okay, 0.92 pounds of phos, 4.14 pounds of K. That's what that plant has to see that day. So if we start thinking about from the time we start tasseling until R1 stage, R2 stage, about 10 days in there, multiply this group here by 10. it starts to add up to a tremendous amount, right? And I got this on my phone. I'll have to look back at it. This is an email I sent to a client of mine. But we were looking at this and talking about a total for the year for that 230 bushel crop. 550 pounds of nitrogen, 69 pounds of phosphorus, 420 pounds of potassium is what that 230 bushel crop is taking up. Do we fertilize that much? Where's it coming from? Well, except in Minnesota where you're using 2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. Well, yes and no. We don't want to burn off. If we're taking that credit from organic matter, we're burning off our organic matter to get that nitrogen, is what we're saying.
It's going back in that stover, right? Yeah, you don't harvest that whole amount.
No, it's in the total plant, right? So there's actually been some research that looks at using radioactive isotopes, attaching it to nitrogen to see how much nitrogen actually gets into the plant. And on average, about 40% of the nitrogen we apply gets into the plant itself, where they can trace it. That's not a lot, right? Dr. Mulvaney from University of Illinois, he went back and started looking at the Illinois recommendations for nitrogen and went back and looked at the trials for that. And so those were static rate plots. Corn on corn, where they applied 0, it was always 0. Where they applied that up to 1.2, 1.8 pounds of nitrogen, it was always 1.8, okay? So like we talked about yesterday with carbon to nitrogen ratios, and we got a lot of carbon out there, right, on a corn on corn situation. If we're applying 0 pounds of nitrogen on all of that carbon, we're starving our microbes, right? We're applying more nitrogen out here on that corn on corn. Those microbes have that nitrogen to break down that carbon and not have so much tie up there. So he went back and started analyzing this, and he said, actually, these numbers are wrong. The most efficient was 0.6. That's where it should be, 0.6 pounds of N per bushel. I can't imagine why we have water quality issues, right? It's just amazing, but old habits are hard to die, right? And we talked about that yesterday, doing field trials. I recommend guys do field trials all the time. You know, do different rates of nitrogen. Figure out where your optimum rate of nitrogen for return on investment is. Don't rely on somebody else to tell you. That's your farm. You take ownership of that, okay? So I did a little arts and crafts project last night. I was in the hotel room. And my gram scale, I couldn't quite get down. Usually in my area, we apply 150 pounds of DAP, 150 pounds of potash, or 200 and 200. You guys kind of do the same? Yes, no, maybe? Don't apply any? I know that's a lie.
2 million gallons of dairy manure, how does that equate?
Well, that's a lot, but I'm saying, hey, I would drive across here, and I know you guys have CHS right here in the Twin Cities, and they sell a buttload of dry fertilizer. So I know this state is using dry fertilizer. Quit lying. How much fertilizer do you guys apply?
75 and 150.
75 and 150. I got a number finally. Why are you guys so shy? I'm not going to bite you. So I was trying to do this at 150, 150. My gram scale couldn't quite get that low. So I ended up having to do a 600 pound rate, doing like a 200, 200, 200. So 200 pounds of urea, 200 pounds of DAP, 200 pounds of potash. Took that, this is a 12 by 12, okay? Sprayed some adhesive on here, spread some dry fertilizer on there. So, yeah, all right, if we plant right here, and Russell talked about those roots going off at a 27.5 degree angle and then going down, right? So, huh?
4.5 inches.
So about 4 inches, so about that far. How many of those little pellets of fertilizer we're going to come in contact with, and this is at a 600 pound rate, so this is a higher rate than what we would typically apply, right? How many are we coming in contact with? Maybe a third, right? So phosphorus, that phosphorus has to be within 1 millimeter of the root to be absorbed. Potassium, 7 millimeters. Nitrogen, 20 millimeters. You start thinking about that, convert that to inches, that's not very far, right?
Talk about your depth movement per year. If we know the corn roots are coming off at a 27-degree angle, with a 2x2 to get below there so it runs into it. If you broadcast it on top, talk about how deep phosphorus moves potassium.
Very, very little, right? That's why if you dig up that plant and you have a lot of roots up around the top, maybe, because that's where the nutrient is. And you get down below that profile and it starts stratifying out. Now, I can guarantee you, how many of you guys read in the No-Till Farmer about the stratification that Mr. Calmer was talking about?
Wait a minute, I thought he didn't spread dry fertilizer ever.
Yeah.
Which one was it?
That's a good question. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
12 years, but he said he hadn't been spreading for 30, so.
Yeah. And then he plows it and he alleviates all this stratification, right? And he has an increase of corn yield or whatever. And this is going to go down a huge rabbit hole here. So when you look at his each inch, he was taking that, he was using it as pounds per acre in that inch, because that's what the soil lab that he uses reports it as, not parts per million, right? So when I said pounds per acre, that's a 6-inch sample. So the number wasn't quite right. So when you start converting that back to parts per million on the depth of that test, his stratification was not as much as what he shows in all of his trials and everything. It doesn't sell tools. It doesn't sell what he's trying to do. The other thing is, his corn plants look big. He had, good rooting depth on it and everything. But where he goes into his no-till field and digs it up, he's got tomahawked roots. Why do you think he had tomahawked roots? Well, soil was tight. It's probably a little bit wet when he planted, and it increases compaction, so he wasn't getting the roots to proliferate through that profile. So you couldn't get the absorption of the nutrients because the roots are right here. So a couple things happen. When you work the soil, what do? Well, you introduce a lot of oxygen into that profile. You're waking up a lot of more microorganisms. And if that soil is that tight, because he doesn't have time to plant a cover crop or anything, but he's got time to mow-bore plow. I don't know. He's in the business of making corn heads. I'm not. I don't understand it. But all of that opened up that soil, loosened it up, so he was able to explore more of that profile. And how many of y'all have mow-bore plowed before? When you mow-bore plow, can you just go in there and plant corn right behind it? So you probably had to work it 1 or 2 more times, right, to make a seed bed. So there's a lot of issues with all of that, right? So be careful what you read out there about stratification without actually digging into it a little bit, okay? Yeah, you got earthworms.
How many you got? How many do you have? Count them?
All of them?
Yeah, I mean, I've taken shovelfuls, yeah.
Have you ever done?
I mean, 8, 10 in a shovelful and a good.
Care if I interrupt you?
Go. This is an open.
So when they did the David Montgomery book back in 2020, Ray came out to the farm and we dug you want to do 1 cubic foot. We had 93 earthworms. So at that point we had been farming one farm for 10 years with regenerative practices. In 1 cubic foot we had 93 earthworms. That's about 3.3 million per acre in top foot. That equivalates out every million earthworms you have, they're going to turn 60 to 80,000 pounds of soil a year.
unfortunately, on that farm, every 7 years would be the equivalent of a mold bore plow. So when people,
Free tillage.
yeah, it's free tillage.
Plus,
And they're pulling that residue. I mean, like we see corn stalk residue now almost down to 1.5 feet. How did it get there? I didn't plant it there. There's worms that actually pull it down through those holes. So nutrient stratification can be a problem if you have dead dirt. If you have biological function, it's not near as bad as what they say.
Have you ever seen an earthworm go through a soil with a spade in its hand? Tremors, yeah. That movie scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. My uncle made me watch that, and I was probably like 8 years old. I couldn't sleep. But you think about it, you don't see that earthworm carrying a spade across your drive in a wet morning, right? So, how's he go through that soil profile?
It is the spade.
What kind of spade?
It's its way.
It eats its way. So if it's eating, what's it eating?
Whatever's there.
Carbon,
Carbon.
residue, microbes. Guess what those microbes are? Nutrients, little bags of fertilizer too. You ever went fishing with worms and you split it in half? What's on your hand? Poop. Guess what that is? Nutrients. That's your nutrient cycle.
So just an example of these earthworms that Russell talked about, our counts aren't quite that high. The last time we did it, we were around 70 something per square foot. But that's high. That's still over 2 million. But what happened here, and I'm accrediting it to the earthworms, somebody can tell me I'm wrong, is when Dawn and I started farming here, our soil test 27 years ago showed that this was 5.8 to 6.2, 6.3 pH on most of these farms here, most of these fields that you see here from the home place. Right now, every one of our soil samples comes back at 6.8 to 7. We haven't put lime on for 20 years.
How does that happen? That their castings are net neutral. That's pretty huge.
Well, Brent always said if you ever had problems with a government official, take them out in a healthy field at nighttime and trip them.
They'd be gone. They'd be gone. I can think of a few. So, going back to this, okay? So we visualize this 600-pound spread across here. Now, what if we banded it? So this is 8-inch band, but really if you were to pull a shank down through here, you're really going to be probably 2 or 3 inches wide instead of 8 inches wide. Now, if we put that plant right down the middle of that, how many of those nutrients are we actually going to be in contact with? 2, 3 times more, right? So now, effectively, we could probably reduce those rates that we're actually applying, have better utilization of them, not sacrifice yield, and save money. So when I asked yesterday, how many of you guys are looking forward to farming next year? When you start looking at commodity prices, fertilizer prices are here, seed chemical prices are here, how are you going to increase your ROI? We got to start thinking differently of how we manage our fertilizer, both pre and in season. Right? It's going to have to take maybe more trips across the field. Like Myron and I were talking there the other night, it's actually becomes you're spending less because you're not spending as much on this.
So what about when I plant corn on 30s and beans on 10?
So I'm not too concerned about, you show me where beans respond to phosphorus.
Beans respond to fertility, not fertilizer.
Exactly. Fred Belo, and I mentioned him yesterday, he talks about 7 or 6 secrets of soybean success. And one of the products he mentions over and over again is maize. What's in maize? And basically DAP, right? Yeah, he doesn't break that apart to find out what's giving me my yield bump out of that product. But he has about 10,000 reasons why he's not going to. Right? So when I worked for a retailer, one of our agronomists, we actually split that out. We wanted to know what was giving us a benefit. So we split it out. Here's the nitrogen, here's the phosphorus, here's the zinc, here's the sulfur. And then we did combinations of all of those to figure out where we got our yield bump from.
Then you started looking for a new job.
Yeah. Basically, the only thing that gave us a yield bump was zinc and sulfur. I've actually seen more yield response on soybeans from potassium acetate than dry potash. So if you strip till, let's say, or ban your fertilizer, that next year you come back into corn, offset your corn rows. Because if you're running on RTK, which if you're going to do this, and the price of RTK has come down, if you compare it to the cost of the fertilizer, cost of seed, and everything else, RTK and that technology is probably a good investment to have. So you could switch or move that over, or maybe turn your rows a little bit. Like, you can do whatever you want. So, you know, you're going to move that band of fertilizer across your field as well.
Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of banding?
Not really.
If you're banding, you want to put that fertilizer in the same spot every time, every year, don't you?
How much is that fertilizer going to be available, that legacy, the next year? 1%. So what the hell does that matter? If we go out there and spread 300 pounds of DAP out here, how much of that DAP the next year is going to be available? It's such a low percent that it actually gets into that plant, you're not going to get it. When I'm talking about banding, I'm talking about, we're not trying to, you're thinking about soil fertility, I'm talking plant nutrition. It's cheaper to feed the plant than to feed the soil.
Can you go narrower? Let's say you're strip tilling and you're dropping your fertilizer down in the strip. Now you've got a 2-inch band.
Yeah.
How deep is too deep for what nutrients? Can you go down 4 inches, 6 inches?
I think you can go down 6.
And that's not gonna, you're not gonna lose it, or. See, that's what my thought was. Now you're still building fertility, and that's what all the landlords test. When you rent your land, you better maintain fertility. You're saying it's not available anyway, but you still have to.
It's having this conversation with them about it, because I've got guys who have, like my future father-in-law, he's been running all liquid for the past 20, 30 years, doing with the planter, for the last 15 years doing it with strip till in front of corn. His K levels are actually really good. His P levels are good. But he's not broadcasting across the whole acre. So that soil's going to naturally kind of level itself out.
Over time.
Yes.
Because otherwise, how would you soil test if you happen to hit that band with your probe?
Yep.
2 times, you're going to really get messed up results.
Yeah. But here's the other thing. We take out a tree line and we farm it. But if we were to soil test it, guess what that level is going to be compared to your field? It'll be less. But guess where the highest yield will be? That tree line. So is it fertility? It's carbon, it's microorganisms, it's all that thing that we've been missing on the whole rest of the acre.